that would be one of the most probably cost-effective things you can do to raise your vision a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in a church, a rural church in Kansas, running about 100. A little country church out in the middle of nowhere. And then I went to a Christian college, turned down a chance to play college football, and ended up playing college basketball. But I went to a little church. My first student ministry church was 30 people. And one man. I did the opening prayer, the pastoral prayer, the offering prayer, the communion prayer, the closing prayer. Came back and asked for another class on prayer. Then I had a church of 60. Then when I graduated, my first full-time church was a church. I was the only pastor. I did youth ministry, everything. It was probably one of the most dynamic ministries I've ever had. It was 125 in the church. But boy, I had some guys and gals that just believed in my wife and I. We worked full-time for $100 a week. It's full-time. We had a baby. And we saw God provide, because what would happen, this little parsonage we lived in, we wouldn't have food a lot of times, and we'd get up in the morning and there'd be a bag of food out on the front steps that somebody had left. And we never asked for it, but God blessed us. We tithed off of $100, and God was really good. Then I had a chance to go back to a Christian college and travel all the United States and see churches. This was one big learning for me, and this is not a part of my talk, but it might help you, is I thought, growing up in the church that I grew up in, that if you had the same name on the front of the church, they're kind of all the same. I found out that the church in Florida is different than the church in New York, is different than Arizona, is different than Kansas. And I came to this conclusion: the reason why a lot of churches don't grow is because church people are totally different in different parts of America. Unchurched people are very similar. And part of our struggle for a lot of other church planters, God's a church planter, if we're not careful, we put our emphasis on reaching church transfers, even though we say we want to reach lost people. And I'm telling you, migrating Christians will give you migraine headaches. Okay? Well, this is a dead or a spiritual group. Church planters, trust me. Because you're starting out, you're so excited to get these new people, and then they're there for a while, and then pretty soon, but I'd like you to do what they used to do over at this church, and that's not your vision. It can really get you off whack, and we'll talk about that. Then I came to Phoenix, was a youth pastor of a church running 800. Then I went to a church running 200 in a double-wide trailer, and we grew to 700 in 3 years on 2 acres of land. And then we decided to start a new church. My wife and I started CCV in our home 35 years ago, four couples, and we grew to about 28,000 on 7 campuses. But the greatest joy in my life is not pastoring a large church. The greatest joy is I've been married to my wife for 51 years. Yeah. My son's a pastor. My 2 daughters are married to pastors. I have 11 grandkids that all know Jesus. And right now, 4 of them are preparing for ministry, and the one's preparing for the mission field. And so that really, when I get to heaven, I don't care about the size of the church, but if all my kids and grandkids know Jesus, I think I've done what God wants me to do. And so the joy that I have is new church planting and church work can be hard. I praise God for CCV because we never had a church fight in 35 years. I grew up in a church where every 2 years we changed pastors. It took a year to get to know them and a year to get rid of them. And when that happens, that's why church people, that's why kids in ministry don't want anything to do with it. So I praise God that my kids never saw a church fight. My wife and I have always had a passion and heart for ministry, and so once we stepped aside, we started a new ministry called Accelerate.Group, and the whole purpose is to pour into pastors and their spouses, because the spouse of a pastor is one of the loneliest people in America. There's hardly nobody they can trust. And I would say to you, if you want to take advantage of our ministry, we do a lot of couples retreats where we bring them in, no charge. They just have to pay to get there, and it wouldn't cost you much because you're already here. But we put them up in a hotel, resort, love on them, give them a date night, just pour into them, develop a safe place where they can learn together. You can go on our website, Accelerate, ACCELARAT.group, and if we can minister to you anyway, let us know. One reason we started that, some research came out that said 80 to 90% of pastors quit in the first 5 years. That's tragic. That's tragic. Okay? And we said, how can we turn that around and encourage pastors and wives? So that's a part of what we're doing, if we can help you with that. What I want to talk to you today is about mistakes I've made in ministry. I've gone to conferences, all my ministry experience, I've never heard a talk on mistakes. All I've heard a talk is on how great this is, how great that is, and how great that is. And what I want to say to you is, be yourself. I think one of the biggest struggles we have today with technology, we can go online and steal anybody's sermon series, anybody's technology, anybody's whatever, and we think it's cool, and after a while that'll catch up with you. If you're going to do ministry, pretty soon God's got to speak out of your heart, not out of somebody else's heart. And for those of you that come from all over the country, I'll never forget this. John Maxwell, who became a friend of mine, not trying to be a name dropper, but basically he said to me, Don, be careful in Arizona that you don't try to model your ministry after Bible Belt churches and those in the Southeast. I go, keep talking. He said, I grew up in Illinois or Indiana. I went to San Diego. Now I'm in Atlanta and Florida. And he said, trust me. He said, when I preached in San Diego, nobody on Monday went to work and talked to their unchurched friends and said, how was church? He said in Atlanta and in the Bible Belt, people get up and when they go to work every Monday, most of them say, how was church yesterday? He said it is a different ball game. And so that was really helpful for me. And for those of you coming from different parts of the country, you're going to find that Arizona is one of the most unchurched least Bible-friendly church cultures in the United States. And so don't get discouraged. Hang in there. Go get it, all right? I'm going to give you about 5 or 6, maybe 7 mistakes that I think I've made in ministry, and hopefully I've learned from them. But believe it or not, it's okay to make mistakes. But what the problem is sometimes, if you don't learn from your mistakes, we keep making the same mistakes. So maybe I made some mistakes. Hopefully I learned from them. Maybe this will help you if you're in the middle of it. Number one mistake I made is believing that all church leaders want their church to grow. You see, most church leaders will say they want their church to grow when you interview. You're coming into the church, or you're going to church plant in a new area, you get a core group together, almost everybody will say, we want our church to grow. However, most people have no idea of the emotional change they're going to go through to make their church grow. Well, I went to that church, running 200, and we grew to 700 in 3 years. I asked them when they hired me, I said, put down in 3 years, on your name, all the elders, put down on a 3 or 5 card, how big do you want this church to be in 3 years? At the end of 3 years, we got the elders all together, and I put on a board all of what they said and added them all up and divided with the number of elders. And you know what it came out to? It came out to 700. Our church was running 700, and almost all the elders, it tore them up. And finally, one elder who was really spiritual, he said, you know what, Don, when I put that number down, when you asked us 3 years ago, I had no idea the emotional change that I would go through with my friends leaving the church and new people coming in and all the changes we would go through. He said, if you had asked me to put that number down again, I would never put that big of a number. How many of you have read Leading Through Change with Samuel Chan? You need to get that. Here's his formula, and I'm telling you, it's spot on. Growth equals change. Change equals loss, and loss equals pain. Therefore, growth equals pain. So a lot of you new church planners here, I just want to encourage you, but you say to me, people look to me and say, Don, I would love to pastor a church your size. I go, really? You have no clue what I've gone through. You're having pain in the small church, but you know what? The more people, more pain. Because the more you grow, the more pain you're going to have. Hear me out. I am convinced more and more after 50 years in ministry that one of the keys to growing a church is your ability to deal with pain. And if you can't deal with pain, you're going to be in trouble. Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Okay, then I won't say what else I was going to say. Trust me, it'll come down later. We're going to do a little Q&A afterwards, because one thing I've learned in ministry and preaching, it's not what I say, it's what you hear. Okay, and so if I say something that comes out a little wrong, don't be afraid to push back and we'll deal with that. So in other words, when you're in a group or you're interviewing for church and they say, man, we want our church to grow, trust me, they have no idea what they will go through to grow. I've never heard a preacher say in an interview, the church said, we don't want to grow. Everybody says that. Number 2, hiring staff. I made a lot of mistakes hiring staff early on. You know why? I was a coach. And as a coach, I thought, you know what, if I work with any athlete one-on-one enough, I can change them. So when I would interview staff, they might have 2 out of 4 that they were really good at. And so I would step away and say, you know what, with my spiritual growth and my pastor and my mentoring and my prayer, man, I can get them to a 4. Not. What you see is what you get. People can grow some, but the best indicator of future growth is what? What they do in the past. All right? And so I made some mistakes on that. And what did I have to learn from that? I had to learn early on that the best person that helped me hire staff was my wife. Because she knew me better than anybody else. And so it was very spiritual. When we started out in our new church and wanted to interview staff, I'd always try to get the husband and wife to come together. Because we'd go out to dinner, the four of us, and I would put them in questions to see who was in charge. Because I wanted to see, is this guy in charge or is his spouse in charge? Because that's huge in ministry. And so I'd ask questions about disciplining kids and so on, and I could find out on the way home. It was very spiritual. I'd say to my wife, what do you think? And if she went like that, we'd hire her. If she went like that, I wouldn't hire her. Because I found out she was better at that than I was, because I thought with God's help and the Holy Spirit, we can't change anybody. So I want to say to you, who is it that you can listen to that will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear? A couple things in hiring staff. One thing I would say is, be careful. Never hire a family member of one of your church leaders. Never hire a spouse of one of your church leaders. Because if you have to let them go, unbelievable. The trust between you and those leaders will never be the same. The good news, bad news, here's what I see happening. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, and maybe Lynn and some of the older guys might agree with this or not, but years ago, almost all of our staff came from Bible college and seminary training. I would say now, by far, the large majority is coming from within. Okay, they're hiring people from the corporate world or whatever, growing up in their church. Here's the good news, bad news. I think people that are trained in more of a Bible college or seminary setting, they tend to be good at recruiting volunteers because they build relationships. The problem with most of us trained in Bible college and seminary, we don't understand results, goals and objectives. And so we spiritualize everything. Well, we just trust God more. No, you're lazy. I mean, you know what I mean? It's some of that, okay? On the other hand, people come from the corporate world. You have to understand it's tougher for you sometimes to build relationships, to add volunteers, because you're used to what? In the corporate world, you pay to get results. Okay? You hold them accountable. You pay for it. In the church, getting volunteers is difficult because it usually comes through what? Relationships. You're not paying them. You have to build relationships. And so I would say to some of you, and then in the new church planting here, be really careful, and I've made some mistakes in this. Be careful hiring people from within your church. Here's why. You have to know, are they called to ministry or are they called to your church? How do you know that? If it doesn't work out at your church, then they go back into the corporate world or they go to another church. And those that go back to the corporate world, to me, they were never called to ministry. They were called to your church. Because in your church, they had a life-changing experience, and they said, man, I want to be a part of that. So you've got to really watch that when you're hiring from within. Because, again, they might want to spend more time with you as the pastor or the leader. And that could be difficult as well. So really deal with that. Number 3, mistake, trying to keep members happy who had a different vision and strategy. Man, I made mistakes in that. Again, I found out that most of the people that caused problems in our church were church transfers. Because when you win people to Jesus Christ through your church, if they were won through your strategy, they automatically believe in your strategy. But people that come from other churches, they might say, I love what you're doing, Pastor Don, but would you start a choir? But would you do this men's group? Would you have this women's Bible study? Would you start this moms program? There was something in the other church that impacted them, but they didn't like everything else. So they come to yours, they like yours, but they want you to do something else. And that's why, if you're not careful, it'll drive you nuts. Okay? And so how do you answer that? I had to learn. Because what they'll do is they'll spiritualize you. They'll walk up and say, Pastor Don, I've been praying, and God's really calling me this church to start this new ministry. or I believe that, this new ministry we need to start. And I thought, how can I answer that? So again, I basically lied. I basically said, you know what, I appreciate that. God hadn't called me to that new ministry. Okay? And that was my way of saying, we're not going to do that. Because you have to be willing to let people go. Because if you try to keep everybody happy, you end up keeping nobody happy. Here was my problem, though. When people left, because I'm a coach, an athlete, and I wanted to win, when they would leave, I try to sit down with them and talk them out of it and say, wait a minute, I don't think you understand exactly what's going on. I'm not sure you have everything. One of the things that rips guts out as a pastor is what? When they tell you we're going to another church because we're not getting it. Oh, isn't that just spiritual? You know, it's just, the joy I had was the church, one of the churches in town. I mean, early on, we had people come to our church and leave our church and say, well, Pastor, we're going there, we're just getting fed more. You stay there long enough, they'll leave that church and come back to yours and say, we're here because we weren't getting fed there. You go like, right? You left because we were in a building program, shooting stuff. If you're in the ministry long enough, you will find that people, many of them will leave as you get ready to get money for a building, but God will call them back after you build the building, and then God will call them away for the next building program. So hang in there. Sorry. But where I made a mistake was, you know what? People in small groups. If they were not in a small group, or they were in a small group, we had a strategy one time, said we're going to multiply these groups every year. We're going to force you to divide whether you want to or not. And I made a lot of mistakes in that. Made a lot of mistakes. What do you do with groups that don't want to grow? What I did, finally, I just let them stay together. But I didn't send new people to those groups, because they'll kill them off. So get the new people together in new groups, you know. But don't mix them with people who've been there for a long time, unless those people have a real vision heart. But I made a lot of mistakes, and so what I finally found out, instead of trying to talk people out of leaving the church, here's what I said, and it was crucial and a big change for me. And I said, you know what? I'm sorry, I can no longer meet your needs as a pastor or our church. You receive my blessing to go to any church you want. I want you to know you're always welcome to come back. You know what? Once I started doing that, some started coming back. Why? Because it allowed a win-win. But when I tried to talk them out of it and said they were wrong, there's no way they could come back, even if they wanted to come back. And so I made a lot of mistakes with that. I want you to know that the person that hurts the most when my friends left the church was my spouse. Very difficult for my spouse. She has very few friends. She has really close friends. But she said something a couple years ago that was profound. In her mourning with some of our closest friends leaving, she said to me, you know what, honey, she said, I just realized that I can only have so many close relationships. And if some of those people never left, I never have a chance for God to bring somebody new into my life. And I said, wow, you're more spiritual than I am. That's pretty good. Okay, but that's how she was able to do with that. So I want to say, keep reaching out to church people. Don't let the devil rob your joy. Okay? Keep a sense of humor. So people are going to have a different vision and strategy. And you know one reason why I think a lot of us get a lot of church people, your vision and strategy is not clear. If your vision is pretty much love God, love people, I haven't anybody, so I'm sorry, forgive me if that's yours. That strategy is so vague, anybody can come to that. And so if you want to really nail down your church and make your church grow, one of the things I had to learn is you got to narrow your focus. If you try to reach everybody, you end up being ineffective at reaching anybody. You attract who you are, not what you want. Write that down. It's huge. Attract who you are, not what you want. And so have somebody come and help you determine who you are. I want to say this. For a year, my wife and I, when we stepped away from CCB, they were asking us not to kind of go to church for a year, so we said, okay. So we started visiting other churches all across the valley. I mean this in love. Almost every church that we visited, in our opinion, was insider-focused. There's a language that all of the many churches that we go to of different denominations, you have a language under yourself that you understand, but people visiting do not understand what you're talking about. Almost every church we visited was friendly to each other. They were not friendly to outsiders. And if you're in a small church, that is very difficult to overcome. Because in a small church, you're a family and you know everybody. And you show up. How do you know that? Just stand in your lobby and watch what happens. My wife and I would go visit churches and stand in the lobby for 15 minutes. This is true. And nobody would come over and talk to us in some of the churches. Why? They were all around drinking coffee and eating donuts and talking to each other in little clusters. But we could stand or walk through and nobody talked to us, okay? Then there was the flip side in a small church. One lady that was at the front door, and you couldn't get into the church except going through her. She shook our hand and said, new people! Welcome! so that was, bless her, but wish she'd find another church too. All right? Ooh, that sounded terrible, didn't it? See, listen, most of the churches I visit, you know who's the greeters? Seniors and singles. You say, what's wrong with that? Who are you trying to reach? If you're trying to reach young couples, you've already told them before the preacher ever gets up that that's not a church for them. I mean, you see that, well, no, that's not spiritual. These people need a place to serve. Okay, that's true. Find them someplace else to serve. You see my heart of compassion? Do you feel it? What I talk about, growth, is consistent with your ability to deal with what? Pain. I know what the formula for success is. I know what the formula for failure is. Try to please everybody. You can't do it. You can't do it. So you got to determine who's God called you to reach and go for it. Don't worry about who Andy Stanley's reaching. That's not who you're going to reach. Okay? Number 4, mistake I made. As the church grows larger, we must add more programs. Why? Well, the more people have more needs, and we need more people to reach more people. Wrong. If you want your church to grow, I believe you've got to narrow your target. As I said, you attract who you are, not what you want. All right? Years ago, it was Peter Wagner that studied churches all over the world, and he came back with this observation. He said churches outside the United States were growing much bigger and faster than the churches in the United States. He determined there was 3 different things that made up most churches: cell, congregation, and celebration. What is that? Cell would be a small group. A congregation would be from a small group size to probably 80. That would be the next size group. And then over that, celebration would be the big worship service. Everybody in your worship service. He said churches around the world only focus on 2, cell and celebration. He said in America, we put way more focus on the congregational size. Interesting. What are you talking about? Women's ministry, men's ministry, singles, college, Celebrate Recovery. None of those are bad. Hang with me. But if you're not careful, most of your staff will end up trying to minister to the congregational size that are already saved, and those are the least effective often at reaching new people. If you look at CCV, we're totally out of the norm. When I left CCV, the percentage of our staff salaries and benefits to the budget was 33%. I guarantee you, most of you are 50 or above. You say, how can you do that? Aren't you paying anybody? No, the difference was we had very few of those congregational group experiences. Okay? So you think through some of that. I would say narrow what you're doing. Do a few things well. In fact, years ago, one of my pastors had a heart transplant, and he couldn't work for about 6 months. And I said, I want you to visit every church within 5 miles of CCV and visit their service, get all their handouts that are given to their church with their programs, and try to do a one-on-one with the senior pastor to find out what ministries they're offering. And you come back and you tell us what ministries can we do that nobody else around us is doing. You see, one reason your church might not be growing is your ministry and what you're offering is almost the same as everybody else around you. Okay? Some of that is the same. It's called the church. But God's wired you different as leaders, and what is your uniqueness that you can do, that you can offer that nobody else is offering? One of the things that I think one of the best ministries that we had at CCV that I was totally clueless until it came to my attention was special needs ministry. Because I found out that they said none of my relatives or children had special needs. And so I never grew up with that. But they said, you know what? People with special needs children, the husband and wife can never attend church together. Always one always has to stay at home. They never get to worship together. I go, are you kidding me? When we started that, the network of special needs was unbelievable of the people that started coming to that. And I'd say that's a pretty prominent ministry in almost every one of our campuses. So again, try something that nobody else is doing. Don't add more programs just because you've got more people. Instead, I would say do less. I made some mistakes. Number 5, another mistake I made as the church grows, I thought we had to keep a balance in evangelism and discipleship. And I'm convinced if your church is going to grow, you've got to put more staff, more energy, and more money toward evangelism. You know why? Over time, your church will automatically turn inward. No matter what you do, your church will turn inward. Why? Because the needs of the people that are members will cry out to you more than the unchurched people that drive by your church. Okay? Now, the struggle is, not for me, and I found evangelism to me was pretty easy. Share the gospel, lead somebody to Christ, baptize them, check the box. Discipleship, I find that churches are all over the map on what they call discipleship. And the trouble with discipleship is, I believe it happens until the day we meet Jesus face to face. We're trying to grow and become more and more like him. So we said, we can measure evangelism from baptisms. How do we measure discipleship? We had no measurement tool. And so we finally came to the place, you do whatever you want. We said, here's 5 things that we think make up discipleship. 1 was corporate worship and personal worship and Bible study. 2 was sharing your faith. 3 was generosity. 4 was connected in a small group. And number 5 was serving. Okay? But after working with that a while, I'm going to make a radical statement. Okay? I believe out of those 5, there's 3 that are much more key to a disciple than the other 2. And I'm convinced in the church, we put most of our emphasis on those 2. I believe personal worship and Bible study small groups are not indicative of discipleship. Why? It can be self-centered. You go to a Bible study because of what you get out of it. You go to church because of what you get out of it. Because most of the church in America today, whether I like it or not, they're consumers. It's when you give your money, you give your time by serving, and you give your witness to share your faith that is most, to me, advancing the gospel and becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ. So if you're gonna come up with discipleship, my learning would be, it's up to you, make sure you don't weight those all the same, because you've got people in your church who've been going to Bible studies since Jesus came. And they've been going to church every week, but they will not serve, they do not tithe, and they haven't invited anybody to church in 10 years. But you see, if we're not careful, we hold them up as the key leaders of our churches. And so go back and think through, what does it mean to be a disciple? Number 6, I got 2 more, hang with me. Number 6, mistake I made is worrying about what my pastor friends thought of my ministry. And if you worry most about what your pastor friends think of your ministry, it'll keep you from dreaming big dreams and trusting God for big things. So I had to ask myself, am I trying to please God or please others? Am I willing to trust God and live by faith? And it really hit me when our church, we went 15 years without property, and we decided to buy 40 acres of land and raise $1 million cash on one day. And we were running about 1,200 people. My wife and I sat down and prayed and decided we would give our house to the church and sell it and move into an apartment. And scared to death. We both came to the same agreement without each of us. Well, what do you think? Here's what I think. It's unbelievable how God worked. And so I thought, how can I share that with the church? And so I started sharing that with some of my pastor friends. Here's what I think we're going to do. I'm going to be honest. Every pastor I talked to except one said, you're nuts. Don't you dare do that. Okay? Why? Because when I shared that sacrifice I was going to make, it made them uncomfortable with the sacrifice they wanted to make. So those of you in new church planning, most of my staff never knew the first 7 weeks of our church, first 7 years of our church, we started 3 new churches, and we were living we were one Sunday's offering away from closing the church. There were times my wife and I never got paid, but my staff always got paid. And so those are some of the things you see in big church, and you go, you guys never had problems. They had no clue. In fact, most of our staff never knew that we never got paid. But that's just something that my wife and I went through. But I'm going to tell you something. If I go back and look at the growth of CCV, it was pretty consistent. But after we gave our house, and since that time, I'm not trying to brag, we've given 2 cars, we've given our retirement twice, we've given everything, but we have more money in retirement now than we ever had. God's unreal. I can't explain that to you as we write it down, but God's been so faithful. But you know what? I think when my wife and I sold our house and gave it to the church, moved into an apartment, our church started to take off because God said, you know what? You trusted me with everything. Now I'll trust you with everything. And so I know some of you church planners, the sacrifice you're going to go through, nobody knows. Your staff doesn't know. That's why your spouse has got to be solid with you, and you have to know that you're called to this, because most people will not understand. And so it's much easier to preach sacrifice than it is live it. Much easier to preach it than live it. Number 7, turn to the person next to you and say, he's almost done. Thank you. All right. Number 7. This one, I'm so excited about what I see here. I did not rejoice when other pastors and churches succeeded. I'm very competitive by nature. I'm the youngest of 4 brothers. They played football at K-State. My oldest brother drowned. My next 2 brothers played football at K-State. They're like 6'3", 250. This doesn't look like 6'3", 250, does it? And so I grew up as the youngest brothers, where my brothers I would say they beat on me, okay? Today we call that abuse. When I grew up, it was called leadership development. Okay, that's really what it was. And so because of that, I had to out-train all of my brothers to break their goals and all that. So I became incredibly competitive. And so the problem is when I got into ministry, I didn't really care whether churches grew or not. I just wanted to make sure our church grew more on sheep straight. And that was unhealthy. Because just because our church wins doesn't mean other churches has to lose. And just because your church is growing doesn't mean the other church down the road has to not to lose. And so Andy Stanley's book, It Came From Within, was really good for me. Because he was talking about the enemies of the heart. And he talked about 4 things, and as I read it, I thought, man, I don't have any enemies of the heart. He talked about greed. Key to that is generosity. I thought, okay there. Anger. I'm not sure about anger. Just forgive. I'm okay. The key to guilt's confession. I'm not afraid to admit that I'm wrong. The 4th one was jealousy. He said the key to overcoming jealousy is celebration. And I go, boom. You got me. You got me. Because I found I could not celebrate other pastors and other churches' success. I had to change that. And that's why when anybody would call me from any church, Lynn, or whatever, any church, I made up my mind after that. I said to the Lord, I will not only talk to mega church pastors, I will always have time for any pastor, any size church in America. And I think once that happened, God began to bless our church more. Because you see, here's the key. The church in America is the visiting team. It's a visiting team. I grew up when you said you go to church, people cheered. Now, you say you're a Christian, they might boo you. Wednesday night was always church night. Schools, when I grew up, you could have youth group on Wednesday night? No. Now, the weekend's not even for the church. Club sports has become one of the new idols. Right? Can hear an amen? Wake up, you have good food, right? No, it's huge. That's changed. Club sports today has changed. And you know why it's worse? I grew up where mom and dad was in charge. The kids didn't run the family. Now we have kid-centered families. And with kid-centered families, they're going to do what the kids want. Okay? Hang with me. Another learning I had. Most of you might know our goal at CCB is to reach the man. Nothing against women. But we read statistic after statistic that the key of reaching the man is to reach the whole family. But you know what? Even if you're going to reach the whole family today, or men, you better have one of the best children's programs in the country. Because parents today, even unchurched parents, will do anything for their kids if you have a great children's program at your church. And so those are some learnings, that the mistakes that we had to make. And so what I want to say to you is, this is exciting about what Vision Arizona is doing. And you know what I found out? Unity from churches, don't miss this, comes more from mission than theology. I was always raised, if we have the same theology, we're all united. No, I found out that I have more in common with people of different denominations that have a heart for lost people than some of my own pastor friends that we believe the same theologically, but they're into maintenance ministry instead of risk and reaching lost people for Jesus Christ. So the great things happening here, you come and clap and share stories of celebration with each other, and you can be next to a church 5 miles down the road that's growing, maybe taking some of your people, and you can still celebrate and say, we're going to reach this valley for Jesus Christ. Because we are the visiting team, and we're going to have to learn that we've got to work together. Got to work together. So keep it up. That's huge. I made that big mistake. I did not rejoice when other churches succeeded. And I think God really convicted me on that. I'm going to stop there. Got a few more. I'm going to stop there. If you want to ask any questions, I'll take a few minutes for questions, and then I'll be out of here. Again, I'm honored to be here. If I can ever help you in your ministry, give us a call. Accelerate Group. Yes, Lynn?
So Don, can you go back and talk to us just for a few more moments about any other insights you've got about hiring staff? I think that's one of the places we make our biggest mistakes. We pay the dues on that for months, sometimes years. Anything else you can speak to us in wisdom about hiring staff?
Hiring family members can be your greatest joy or your greatest sorrow. And so you're going to risk it. I mean, it can be great, but if it goes south, it can impact you and your family for a long time. So think that would be one. The first question I would ask in interviews, and I've done this for years, it's the most profound question I can ask. Tell me about your relationship with your father, and then I just be quiet and listen to him talk. Because, hang with me, my experience is if a boy or a girl has not had a good relationship with their father, they can be on staff at age 32 and you feel still like you're working with junior high people. They want to challenge authority every decision you make because they miss that relationship. So one of the first keys I always ask, tell me about your relationship with your father. Here's one thing that you're going to go through as your church grows. And I'm the outlier. I didn't have an executive pastor until our church was running 10,000. Okay? I mean, you're going to hear my heart. I see church planners today hire an executive pastor when they start. And it's like, if you're starting with 3 staff and you got to hire somebody to manage 3 staff, go get a book on leadership. Good grief. That is a wasted salary. If you have to have, and something else church planners do that I never did, they put their wife on staff so they both get paid, but you just robbed yourself of hiring another pastor whose wife is for free. See, my wife has worked in all areas of ministries at CCB for 50 years unpaid. And I'm thankful for that. Do we need the money? You better believe it. But because I didn't have to pay her, I was able to hire somebody else. Okay? Doesn't always work that way, but you got to think through that. So, because the 2 things that you'll never get rid of, no matter what size your church is, it started with me in my living room, and it was with me the day when we left at 30,000. The 2 things you'll always struggle with is raising funds and hiring the right staff. You're right. Those 2 never go away. You see, declining churches don't have to worry about money. They're not in building programs. It's the growing church that always is in building programs. And raising funds is unbelievable. And the gentleman from EECU or whatever was right on. Bible colleges, they're still training my grandson the same way they were training me. Every Bible college should have a course in personal financial management and how to look at a budget sheet when you're sitting down with corporate elders, and most of them aren't doing it anymore. And so we need to get that. The ministry that you're being called to right now is so much more complex than what I started with 50 years ago. HR issues, LGBT, all this kind of stuff, it's huge. So I would say, I go back, Lynn, be careful hiring family. Be careful. I said hiring from within. If you hire somebody from another part of the United States, it'll probably take a year for them to adjust to the Valley's culture. So don't expect quick results in the first few months. It took me a year, and I had to ask all kinds of questions and visit with a lot of people to understand the culture from Kansas to Phoenix when I came out here in 1975. Okay? That helped maybe a little bit here. Okay. Yes?
What have been some of the key successes in your church and youth ministry? What are some of the things that really drove ministry to grow?
Okay. One of the keys for me was when our church was running about 800, it just so happened we had 3 youth ministers in 4 years. That's not really healthy. Okay? My son was getting out of ministry, and he said, I'd like to come and intern and be your youth guy. And I said, whoa. So back then, nepotism was wrong. Okay? And so I said with the elders, my son wants to do an internship, but before we consider him for an internship, if he does the job, and he's really good, I don't want you to say, well, we can't hire him now because he's your son. So you determine ahead of time and give me a call. They said, let's go for it. He was by far the most effective youth minister I've ever had. Put probably 100 kids in full-time ministry. Okay? You know why it was effective? I know who I reach. I reach athletes and businessmen. He was an All-American in sports. And so when the men, unchurched men, would come to our church and bring their kids who were also more athletic and businessmen, he could relate to their kids, and it was very consistent, and we were attracting the same people. Does that make any sense? See, if you're not careful, if the youth pastor would have been somebody that never played sports, grew up in a broken family, which many do today, and all that, that would have been successful, but it would have been a totally different demographic than I was reaching at that time. Does that make any sense? Okay? One of the things that we had to go through, I think too many youth ministries today, who they have as their youth sponsors are college kids that were just out of high school. That's called the blind leading the blind. Okay? And so what I always tried to do was have a mix of adults who have teenage kids and college kids, and I'll put them together in the same group working with that, because I want some experience with some of this as well. Does that make it? So don't, that's why, well, this is not another question, but hang with me. A lot of people today are saying, you know what, we got a real problem in the church today because the kids leave our churches and go away to college and they never come back. You know why they never come back? Their church doesn't exist. If you went to junior high and high school worship for 6 years and never went to the adult service, and you go away to college and they say come back to church, you can't. You've never been to the adult service for 6 years. It's not your church. Interesting. So, if I was still at CCV, we would kill. We would pray about it. We would have tried to discourage doing high school ministry, worship service. Small groups, yes. But I think the best way to energize your church if it's older is get the high school kids involved in serving, get them greeting, get them out there, get them involved in worship, and they will add energy and life. Because when youth worship was started umpteen years ago, the reason why it started is because most of the adult services were old hymns and choirs and all that. It was drastically different. The youth worship service at CCV and the adult service is 90% the same songs, the same style. Okay? And I think what you're going to have happen, if I'm going too long, hang with me, okay? I think what happens in most of our youth ministries today, we're losing the juniors and seniors.